In 2021, Craig Nuttall got a devastating phone call. He had just returned from teaching search and rescue techniques to a group of mountain guides at the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering in India.
A week or two later, I received news that they had been up at altitude of 16,000 feet. An avalanche hit them, and 29 of them passed away. I knew, because we were training the very first search and rescue team for that area, I knew there was no one there to go rescue them. And I'd met some of their families, so I knew that they were leaving families behind in these little mountain villages and with very little opportunity for income, and knew that there was going to be a bad situation there for them. But it kind of just tore me up inside. I just decided right then and there that I needed to do more for these people.
Welcome to the Why Magazine podcast, bringing you ideas, stories, and voices from Brigham Young University. My name is Whitney Archibald, and I'm here today with Craig Nuttall, a nursing professor at BYU, an emergency medicine nurse practitioner, and the founder of the Mountain People Project, an organization dedicated to training medical and rescue teams in mountainous areas around the world. I happen to have experience with the rescue side of this equation, and I'm forever grateful for paramedics expertly trained to rescue me after my own rock climbing fall. But this expertise is something many of us may take for granted if we live in places where trained medical professionals, ambulances, and life flight helicopters are at the ready for such emergencies. This is not the case in many countries around the world, including the Garhwal Himalayas in India. The country has several institutes of mountaineering that train mountain guides, and the government funds search and rescue teams in the Himalayas. But when Craig Nuttall first visited the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering, the largest of these institutes, the mountain guides had very little medical training.
India doesn't have paramedics or EMTs, things like that. They have nurses and doctors. This is kind of their first foray into kind of EMT-like certification. It's called the Wilderness First Responder course. It's pretty standard in the U.S. for anyone that's working in the outdoor industry. And that's why we're bringing it to India, to help them be able to take care of people in those crazy situations.
Craig made it his mission to provide this training, but first he had to better understand the scope of the problem. One of the main sources of medical challenges in the Garhwal Himalayas is the sheer number of people trekking into the mountains each year on a pilgrimage to holy sites.
3 million Hindu pilgrims come there every summer to worship Lord Shiva at the glaciers that feed the Ganges River. And there's very little medical access, but there was no literature or data to suggest where that medical access was or how bad it was or if there even was any. And so I decided, along with one of these training sessions that I went on, to go on the pilgrimage with the Hindu pilgrims and just see where they would access medical care. And found a little charitable hospital that's there at the Kedarnath Temple, which is at about 13,000 feet at the base of Kedarnath Mountain. So these very, very tall mountains. And if you can imagine 30,000 people a day coming up there or more, depending on the day, and over a 4 or 5 month period, about 3 million people coming there.
Wow.
And very little infrastructure, pretty high altitude, very different weather than the plains of India. And they're walking hundreds of kilometers to get there. And then they're not prepared for the weather. It rains almost every night or snows, drops below freezing temperatures. And just what I witnessed there at this little tiny hospital, there's a 3-room clinic, and they see about 1,000 patients a day. Most of those are like for minor things, but quite a few of those came in for hypothermia or major trauma or major altitude illness type things.
Wow.
And there's a staff of like 2 doctors and 3 nurses, right, trying to take care of all these people.
Craig was starting to get a picture of all the medical needs for this area and started working on a plan to give these pilgrims better access to vital health care. This ambitious project is something young Craig Nuttall would never have imagined himself taking on. Because of a learning disability, Craig didn't actually learn to read fluently until after he graduated from high school.
There were times that I really struggled in school, but also I learned how to think outside of the box. I had to learn how to get through school without being able to read very well. And it made me think of things in a different way, which has been a huge benefit to me in my career now.
After his mission, Craig went to nursing school and graduated from Utah Valley University.
And I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be a professor at BYU. Didn't think I was smart enough to do much. Worked really hard, became an emergency nurse out of school, and loved that. And then decided to go back and get my nurse practitioner degree.
He practiced for a while and then came back to BYU to teach while still working as an emergency nurse practitioner. When it came to projects and research, Craig gravitated to the mountains. Growing up in Utah, he had always loved exploring the Wasatch Range.
I wanted to do something that was inspiring to me and that I felt like I could use my skill set to help other people. And, I love the mountains. I love climbing. And so I thought, well, maybe there's some people that really need this education and need to be able to take care of other people that are injured at high altitude. And I have that skill set. And so I just started contacting places to see if there was anyone interested in me coming and teaching. And the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering was the first ones that reached back and said, hey, yeah, we'd be interested in you coming and training. And so it worked out. If we're willing and put our effort into it, Heavenly Father makes that effort work, right?
Can you kind of paint a picture of what it was like for you going on that pilgrimage?
Yeah. So the pilgrimage starts out in Rishikesh. This is a city that sits on the Ganges River, right at the base of the hills of the Himalayas. So there's big, green, subtropical flora and fauna hills right there coming down to the Ganges River. And this is kind of the last big city before the pilgrimage really starts. So everyone from all over India and the world comes to Rishikesh every May when this pilgrimage opens up. And they wash themselves in the Ganges River traditionally to purify themselves before they go on this pilgrimage. And they're hoping that through going on the pilgrimage, they can receive enlightenment and sanctification, basically. And so they wash themselves symbolically and they offer gifts to the river. And that happens every single night, the entire summer, but especially like the beginning of May when the pilgrimage season opens up. They gather all their supplies and they leave from Rishikesh, and everyone's dressed in orange. And if you're doing this pilgrimage traditionally, you walk the entire pilgrimage route, which goes to 4 holy sites, again, at the base of the glaciers. So they start up in this very narrow canyon with the tributaries of the Ganges coming down, and very, very steep walls and treacherous roads. I mean, these roads get washed out frequently because it's so steep. There's mudslides all the time. But
wow.
Anyway, so they hike up this, I think a total of 900 kilometers in all when they get done. And they just make their way up to these little tiny temples. And these temples sit at the base of a huge mountain that's snow-covered. A big glacier comes down to each temple. The Kedarnath temple, which I went to, I didn't go to all 4 sites. I just went to the highest of the 4.
Okay.
A lot of people drive kind of to the end of the road, and then everyone has to hike the last 20 kilometers up over a mountain pass, like 6,000 feet of elevation gain, through snow and along a raging river. And there, if you have more money in India, you take a helicopter. So there's also the buzz of helicopters constantly all day long coming back and forth to the base of the temple. And you get up to the top, there's yaks and donkeys, and they all have bells on. So you hear just ringing of bells all the time. And you just watch this constant stream of people coming up to this temple. And they wait in line to get into the temple. I mean, the line is probably 3 or 4 kilometers long. They wait in that line for probably 2 days to get 5 minutes in that temple. And they sit at that temple, do their worship, and then they come out and make their way back or to the next temple. So that's the traditional way of doing it, is hiking that whole way up. It's a very chaotic scene. 30,000 people, helicopters, donkeys, yaks, people worshiping, and they worship all night long. There's chanting all the time. So hopefully that kind of gives you, and there's incense and smoke rising all the time. So I don't know if that kind of gives you an image of what it's like.
All 5 senses overload. Right?
And India is very much that way anyway, right? Like the food's always spicy. There's always noise. There's always smells. And you're in the Himalayas. So you're just in the grandeur of all that at the same time, it's a pretty unique, inspiring place. I mean, watching those pilgrims wait in line that long for 5 minutes of worship and just how dedicated and devoted they are to that and how much risk they take to get there and hardship they take to get there makes me think, why don't I have the time to get to the temple that's 5 minutes away from my house, right? Anyway, it makes you think, how devoted am I to my religion? Super inspiring for me.
Where are people sleeping along this route? Yeah,
that's a good question. There's not a lot of buildings, so they take a tent or they sleep out in the open around little fires. So it's just, A lot of them are just exposed to the
Yeah.
cold. I mean, there are a few tents. If you have money, there's tents in a couple of buildings that you can rent. They're very hard to get. You have to rent them 6 months to a year in advance to even get a spot. But most people are just going and just finding a place to lay down and fall asleep. And a lot of them stay in line all night long, right? So they're sleeping on the ground right there in line waiting to get into the temple.
And are we talking like all ages? Like, are there children on this
yeah,
route or
good
mostly
question. I mean,
adults?
I did see a few kids. Mostly we don't see kids. It's mostly older adults.
Okay.
As you can imagine, someone trying to go on pilgrimage and they've been saving up their whole life to do this. It's usually like their 60s or 70s maybe. And they're accompanied by someone in their 30s or 40s. And so,
Okay.
I mean, that also adds to the medical necessities in this area, right?
Yeah.
We see a lot of heart attacks along the pilgrimage route as we've been keeping some data. Exertional illnesses. I mean, I had a hard time hiking 20 kilometers over 6,000 feet of elevation. Now imagine someone that has never been to altitude, their 70s, right? And trying to do that. I mean, it's just thinking about it just is overwhelming a little bit and inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really, really amazing. So this is like a once in a lifetime thing for most of these people.
Most of the time.
Okay.
Yep. Most of the time, because the amount of time that it takes to do it. I mean, even if you're driving, it takes a good month to do it probably.
Wow.
And if you're walking it on foot, it takes the whole like 6 months through the monsoon season and things like that. So, I mean, it's crazy what they're giving up and the economic burden, I think, of it. I mean, they have to leave their jobs and it costs a lot of money.
Yeah. So did going on that pilgrimage give you ideas for how you could help improve the medical training?
Yeah, came back from that pilgrimage and wrote up a document kind of explaining where the medical care was and writing a few suggestions of how we could improve medical care. Things like they need a dedicated helicopter medical team that can come and transport critical patients from these high altitude sites down to a major hospital. Because if they don't have that, it's going to take 2 or 3 days to get medical care.
Yeah.
Or things like we need telemedicine in this area for access to specialist care, because this little hospital has new doctors that don't know how to take care of certain things. And so having someone that is more senior, more experienced that they can call and ask questions to and consult would be very beneficial. For one of the doctors I was in contact with and had worked quite a bit with in the past on some other projects, happened to be put in charge of all the medical care along the pilgrimage route the next year. And he started implementing almost everything that was in the document. So,
wow.
So over the next couple of years, since that time, they started a telemedicine program. This past year, we trained the very first helicopter emergency medical team.
Wow.
And they got a helicopter that was just inaugurated a couple of months ago, and they've transported their first patients this past summer. So we've gotten that, and we trained about 500 nurses and doctors that worked on this pilgrimage route. We've also trained a bunch of lay people, taxi drivers and mountain guides and things like that. So total of probably about 1,400 people that have been trained in some sort of medical care to help the pilgrims and help keep people safe and improve access to medical care in this part of the Himalayas.
That is incredible. How does that feel to go from that stage of coming up with those ideas to then seeing them all happen?
Oh, I mean, very much miraculous. It's amazing to me how the Lord takes small little things that we do and makes a difference with those things, right? Even though I could see some weaknesses in those and I could see some ways that we could have done it better maybe in the past. Heavenly Father takes those things and transforms them into something useful. So I'm just grateful that document I wrote up got into the right hands and that people were actually receptive to that and made some changes. Because, I mean, I'm a foreigner coming into this area and witnessing things that are pretty sacred for this culture, right? And making suggestions to improve that. But they were receptive to that and started making those changes and saw the need for improvement. I mean, they're amazing people. I feel pretty lucky to be a part of it.
That is really beautiful. How often do you make it over there?
I've been going like twice a year for the last few years. Combine it with the study abroad that I've taught. I take 14 nursing students to the AIMS Rishikesh hospital, and they work there in the hospital. And we do a humanitarian project in a slum in that area as well. We're going again in March. A faculty member named Carly Peterson, she's a neonatal nurse practitioner. She's working on her own projects there to help improve neonatal and maternal care
Cool.
So the nursing students help a lot with that. So they go to small villages and do training on helping babies breathe and improving the newborn care in those areas. So,
can you tell me about some of the people you've met through this?
one of the very first times I went to the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering, I had no way of getting from the airport to the institute, which is like a 7-hour drive. And so I just thought, I'll just get to the airport and I'll just hire a taxi. Well, you don't want to just hire any random person because they can take advantage of you. And so a few weeks before I left, I somehow got in contact with the humanitarian missionaries in Delhi. They knew a man, only member of the church in all of Rishikesh.
Wow.
He had a car and was a driver. And so I called him, and that actually ended up being one of the biggest divine intervention moments of all of my experiences in India, is getting in contact with Raju, who has really made a lot of these projects possible in the background, because he helps with the logistics and the cars and helps me keep in contact with people throughout the year when I'm not there. And I'm so grateful for those humanitarian missionaries just getting me in contact with him so that I could build that relationship. I mean, I talk to him probably once every other week. We call each other brother because I feel like that family connection with him. He has me to his house every time I come. When I called him, I think it also helped him as well. He was at a moment where he was very depressed in life and was praying whether he should stay in the church or not. He was really struggling financially. And so me calling him right after he had started praying to see whether he should leave the church or not was like a sign for him that he needed to stay in the church. And he's been able to help me in critical moments in India that have really benefited me. And so I feel like Heavenly Father prepared both of us in different ways and brought us together. And so if we're trying to do what Heavenly Father really wants us to do, even if we're not perfect at it, He's going to make it work, and He's going to put people in our way, and we're going to be able to benefit each other.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about what the future looks like. What are some of the things you're hoping for this project?
Next year, we're going back to train more mountain guides, and we'll continue to do that. We're making that program more robust, training the trainers actually now to make that an independent project. My whole philosophy with these projects is I don't want to be the guy that they rely on for the rest of time to make this thing work. So I want them to become self-sufficient. So we've trained some of the trainers already to help perpetuate our mountain medicine education for the mountain guides at Nehru Institute of Mountaineering. That's going to finalize this next year. We've trained the helicopter emergency medical team this past year. We're going back to kind of finalize some of that training and finish up some of the research we're working on with them. And then they are going to be training 6 more teams throughout India themselves. And so they've started to become self-sufficient, which is great. And so because of that self-sufficiency, we're now moving to other projects. And so I got off the phone today with a man from Nepal. We're going to work on a similar project in Nepal.
Great.
Helping along the Everest trekking route to help tourists and local villagers have increased access to medical care. We went this past October to the country of Georgia, working in the Caucasus Mountains, where we help train mountain guides in that area. There's no search and rescue teams there. So, and we have some prospects in South America as well. So we're kind of branching out a little bit and starting these programs and helping educate people, and then help them learn how to educate each other, and so that it becomes self-sufficient. I've taken probably more out of this project than I've given back. And a lot of that is learning from the people, whether it's the Hindu pilgrims giving up everything that they have and sacrificing so much just to go worship and being inspired by that, or it's watching people like Raju, this member in Rishikesh, just struggle to be his family being the only members for 10 hours of driving, right? Like their closest ward is in Delhi. And just the sacrifices and the hardship that they have to go through just to worship and continue to be members. I've taken so much from their examples. So super grateful for those opportunities.
Thank you for listening to the Why Magazine podcast. We would love your input as we plan the rest of this year. You can give us your feedback and suggestions for the podcast at the listener survey linked in the show notes. This episode was based on the article Healing in High Places by Abby Phelan Horspool in the winter 2025 issue of Y Magazine. If you enjoyed this episode, you may also enjoy other episodes about international service. Saving Days, Ending Period Poverty with Days for Girls, and Life and Breath, BYU Students Improve Public Health in Nepal. And you can hear the story of my rock climbing fall in the episode called Spiritual Lessons and a 30-Foot Fall. This episode was produced by me, Whitney Singley Archibald, with executive producer Brooklyn Hughes-Romer, and editing help from Abby Phelan Horspool. Original music, mixing, and mastering by Jarrett Davis.